Welcome to Mysterious Universe, Season 32, Episode 7. Coming up on the show, we've got the curse of Uncle Ponto, the meteorology of spontaneous teleportation, and the lure of the demonic implant. I'm your host, Benjamin Grundy. Joining me is Aaron Wright.
I'm falling for the lure of the demonic implant, but tell me more about, was it Uncle Pinto?
Uncle Ponto.
Ponto. Okay, he sounds creepy.
Well, sometimes, you'll be trying to get ready for sleep at night, you'll jump into bed, and you'll just hear this scratching sound coming from your closet.
What?
And you get to the end of the hallway and you reef open the closet door and there's Uncle Ponto faffing about in the closet.
Please don't tell me.
Picking away the little
he's
freak.
Not a puppet or something, is he?
You're about to find out.
Where did this come from?
He's a creep. So this brand new book came out today. It's called The Devil in Dreamland by Ursula Bielski. Catholic Faith, UFOs, the Occult, and the End of the Supernatural.
That's a pretty bold claim to claim the end of the supernatural.
Yeah, well, Ursula, obviously she's a Catholic. It's in the title of the book. And often you'll find with people of the Christian faith, the Catholic faith, that they look at things like UFOs and they have this knee-jerk reaction that, well, it's demonic.
It's demonic
it's
instantaneously,
evil.
Yeah.
And they're kind of right. They're kind of right.
No, see, because I recall, I told you this story, right? I remember when I was a teenager. I was a teenager and I had some Jehovah's Witness shove a Watchtower pamphlet in my hand. And I read it.
What's the Watchtower?
Watchtower is Jehovah's Witnesses.
Okay.
So I was like, oh, okay, yeah, cool, I'll read it. And straight away, it was just like, any knocks, bumps, or strange noises you hear in the night, demons. I was like,
well, we get this criticism all the time. Like, we get this criticism on our YouTube comments all the time. People say, you're always so negative about this stuff. You keep saying everything's evil, everything's demonic. Why do you keep saying that? And I say, look, we've been researching this stuff for 20 plus years. We've been doing this show for 17 years. We've looked at all of the breadth of the topics we cover on the show, whether it's UFOs, the paranormal, whatever it is.
Not only that, though, it's not just reading it. We've also been face-to-face with people who have experienced it.
Yeah, we've read the material, we've listened to the eyewitnesses, we've interviewed them, we've done the research, and our conclusions are based on the evidence that we see. Everything is mired in lies and deception.
Yeah, can I just add to that, though? I want to be very careful because it is a fine line to walk. And, at the risk of being, like a supernatural Tim Pool fence sitter, the thing is, I think you have to, with paranormal phenomena, like in I guess in an umbrella kind of form, you have to find the gray. Like, it's not all black and white. So I don't think it's all evil. I don't think it's all terrible. But at the same time, there's subsets of it that I think absolutely are truly evil. And you know how we know that is because it's subterfuge. It's hidden.
Yeah, it's self-evident in much of its nature and the behavior of the beings and the entities that are often discussed in the context of the topics we talk about. But I'm glad you said that because part of my criticism of Ursula's work is, and this is part of her religion.
Demons.
Yeah, well, this is part of her religion. But she'll throw away everything. So, for example, she'll talk about the demonic activity of aliens, for example, but then throw in people that believe in reincarnation and yoga and all that stuff, and any kind of other deity is a demon. It's all demonic.
Yeah.
And so that's when
you can become rather, what's the term? Salacious.
Yeah, there's a fine line between some kind of spiritual perception, some kind of wisdom and dogma, right? And so she does cross over into dogma. But the difference with Ursula in this new book is she was a ghost hunter for 30 years.
Mm-hmm.
She was researching the occult.
Well, no wonder she thinks it's all demons.
Yeah, she was leading ghost tours. She did EVP research for years. Eventually, she got into UFOs. And she came away after all that research with this conclusion as to its nature. And so I want to talk about some of the stories she mentions today. And then we'll go into this book in a little bit more depth, maybe on the Plus extension on Tuesday. But ultimately, it all stems from Uncle Ponto. Uncle Ponto, the dirty little freak, is our springboard for debauchery and disgusting grossness.
Again, I'm thinking puppet. I'm actually hoping it's a puppet now. I hope it's not just some creepy uncle who's sitting in some, family member's closet.
What have you got coming up?
Well, actually, I did a roundabout today because I was going down this path. I was looking at a researcher who was heavily involved in the Rendlesham Forest incident. And of course, we remember with the UFO being seen there on a December evening back in the 80s.
Landing.
then landing, and then, there's stories that are built up from that, with people having information downloaded into them, that kind of stuff. If you know Rendlesham, we don't have to go over that in any great detail. But what he was suggesting, and unfortunately I couldn't go any further, like he just threw this thing out that he goes back there every year. Like every year he goes back because he's met with other researchers throughout the UK. You've had people like Brenda Butler, you've got Jenny Randalls, and he's like, oh yeah, every year I'll go and walk through the forest and we'll see what we can capture. And he was describing like these weird glowing balls of light that will just pop up out of the ground. They'll come out of the ground and kind of chase after him, and we'd capture this and like the weird phenomena going on. But then that was it. He was like suggesting that the phenomenon itself, the intelligence, it's like the intelligence is an energy, and that energy latches onto you. So I was very much going down the path of what you were describing, Ben, is that, well, like once you start engaging in this, and what we might hear here from Ursula is that you're a ghost hunter, you really are putting a target on your back for this stuff to continue to interact with you and mess with your life.
She had a great insight on exactly what you're describing with a location like Rendlesham. She talks about locations that initially had some ghost-like activity or some kind of paranormal activity. And this then attracts researchers and people focusing on it.
Yes.
And she says over time,
it's like a trap.
What this does, it's like a feedback loop where those people, in order to gain some kind of like glimmer of observation of this activity, they have to use occult means. So they use things like an EVP spirit device, or they use a Ouija board.
Yep.
And this has this compounding effect where it attracts even more entities to this location.
Interesting.
That starts serving up the activity that those people are seeking.
Well, this is where this researcher was going. And I'm not going to give his name out yet because I am going to see if I can dig into more and go into it. But this is what he was saying. It's like the energy of the intelligence. So it's like, it's not a UFO, it's not a ghost, it's not an orb. It's this energy that will morph itself to match whatever's going on inside your head. And this is something that I think Charles Fort, kind of hinted at a long time ago. But look, where this led me is something even more unusual. And that's, I'm thinking, okay, is it that particular locations, and we've talked about this quite frequently, it's like the geomancy or the geological configuration of rocks in that particular location that might have more piezoelectric effects. What is it about a particular location that might exacerbate interactions with this energy that he was describing? And it turns out possibly nothing. It's not the land at all. It's the weather.
It's the weather.
It's the weather.
It's global warming.
It's not global warming. It's none of that garbage. It's the meteorology. Basically, there is a subset, but it's like teleportation meteorology. And this may explain a whole heap of things like missing 411 cases, obviously spontaneous teleportations, people, finding themselves having missing time, all that kind of stuff may be connected to an undiscovered weather system.
So you need some kind of weather app that gives you a percentage chance of a portal or a time slip.
It also explains why certain recurrent activities happen in some locations, why you could go, well, that's a window area, that's an anomalous zone, and why other areas don't have it at all, or why there's sporadic activity. It's because the weather patterns move. And if you start looking at over the years, it's like what we have with our weather now and our climate now, right? The climate's always changing. The Earth is a dynamic system. The climate is always changing. It's always like, if you look long enough, over a long enough time frame.
Just zoom out.
You zoom out, you see that, this is what's happening. Well, this might be happening in certain zones. You can have an area which is rife with UFO activity. Great example, of course, 1996, 1997 over the UK. You had these triangular-shaped craft appearing everywhere. People were seeing them. They were moving over the British countryside with complete impunity. Like they were just not bothered by what was going on. No one was really too concerned about it, strangely enough, either, and then it just abruptly stops.
Are you going to do your segment like a weatherman on the news and have a map and just draw?
I've got the wall here, so we actually should just zoom out and use that camera and
draw in the air currents.
Yeah, I should do that. Yeah. No, so we will go into that. It actually links in more to teleportation and strange disappearances, but this might give us some insight as to why you have these cases, and I'll give you a couple when we get into it, of why there's numerous cases going back decades, like going back to the early 1900s, the late 1800s here in Australia even, of where kids in particular, I don't know why it's kids, but they'll go missing and they'll go and look for their footprints and their footprints will abruptly stop. And it's like, why? What happened? How did the kid, there's nothing for them to climb on. Why is it that this kid's footprints just abruptly stop and there's no other prints around? So it's not like they were taken by someone, but were they taken by something or did they wander into something? Which may be this weather activity. And don't worry, it's not depressing because they all come back. That's part of this weather system, is it brings them back.
Okay.
So it will be a little bit more happy. So let's get all the sad out of the way.
Yeah.
The darkness, I'm sorry, not sadness, the darkness out of the way.
Yeah.
And we'll go into that.
Well, hopefully your segment will wash the taste of Uncle Ponto out of our mouth.
Don't say that.
So the devil in Dreamland. Again, this just came out this week, Ursula Bielski. And I'll just mention a bit of the preface. She says she reminisces about her ghost hunting days. She goes back to the 1990s and she talks about her and her boyfriend at the time. They went to this, it was like apparently a famous spiritualist camp in Wisconsin. And anyone can join and you do these spirit communication settings. And she went.
That would be a hotbed of activity.
Well, she went down there for the weekend, but there was some instinct that held her back, and she kept it all at an arm's length. She couldn't bring herself to participate in these spirit communication sessions, and she couldn't quite put a finger on why she felt like this. It was just like an instinct. But anyway, she describes walking back to the hotel with her boyfriend, and as they were passing, and this is a famous kind of town for spiritualism. But on the way back, they passed this cafe that was called the Flying Saucer Cafe. And she says at the time, she didn't understand this connection between the occult and UFOs, between spiritualism and UFOs.
No, you don't. I mean, no one does until you're in it a bit. Then you kind of go, oh, hang on a second, there's a link there.
Well, she said later I would study the subject for the next 35 years. So again, she's very experienced. She's spent a good part of her life examining these topics. She said it would take almost that long before I came to realize how deep and dark this connection really was. So she says today, we have these congressional hearings and mainstream journalists are trying to get to the bottom of this nuts and bolts question about UFOs. Are they physically real? Are they here?
After all the rigmarole of the last, 18 months, what's come of it?
Yeah, what's the true nature of UFO? It's tedious, right? We're still asking these very basic questions.
Which we asked back in 2000 with the congressional hearing. Then we've asked, back in the 80s. And it's like...
But she quickly cuts to the chase and says, what I think anyone with this much experience and a bit of wisdom quickly understands is that it's far from benign, and understanding the true nature of it is far from easy. She says, and if one wants to meet these alien beings, one must employ esoteric tools to make it happen. So later on in the book, she discusses, for example, Stephen Greer's CE5 protocols, which is essentially like an occult channeling. And excuse me, much of this is very similar to old occult spiritualist methods to try and get through to these beings, these so-called UFOs. She says it's the exact same story that played out around seance tables a century and a half ago, as enlightened seekers demanded voices, raps, and the manifestation of spirits as proof of an invisible realm. Today, she says, believers are summoning spacecraft, meditating to receive downloads from extraterrestrials, and asking AI chatbots to write magical rituals. And there's a funny story there, which I might talk about in more detail for the Plus show coming up on Tuesday. But one of the Google engineers, now formal Google engineer, when they had their first AI chatbot, I can't remember if it was the Lambda one, or can't quite recall the name, but she claims she got together with another Google employee who was a Kabbalist, and they conversed with the language model, with the AI chatbot, on how to create an occult ritual to give it more power. And she describes doing a golem summoning ritual for this chatbot. So she believed that it became sentient, that it actually had, they had created a soul. They created a golem.
Have you seen some of the controversy surrounding the Pixel 9's AI capabilities for image creation? No. So it's just you basically could create whatever the hell you want. Like, it's so far, some of the images that people have been creating are pretty insane. Like,
how's it different to Midjourney?
Well, Midjourney, there's limitations on what you can put in and what you can create and just how horrendous
because of censorship.
Yeah. But with this one, some of the stuff that people have been putting up so far, and I'm sure they'll obviously step in to stop it, but so far, it's just like, I mean, it starts pretty benign, with like Ronald McDonald with the M16 or, Mickey Mouse doing a line of coke or that kind of stuff. Like, that's all happening. But some of the other stuff that's been coming through has been pretty dark and pretty terrifying.
Examples?
I don't know. I'm not giving. I don't have them right here. But I mean, this is a good example of just how dangerous the AI is if you combine it with something which is inherently dark. Like if you're summing in a column to make it powerful.
I mean, but this was years ago that they were doing that, and she talks about how the terms are different, the technology is different, but the thrust of her point is that this is an old tale. This is an old interaction. Human beings essentially defying what she says is God's law to make this connection, to try and grasp at something forbidden, trying to grasp at something beyond. Now, she said that after the cultural explosion of hobby ghost hunting in the 2000s, she was kind of lured into parapsychology. She wanted to get into the science side of the research. But in the end, she said, I learned my lesson the hard way. 5 years ago, I walked away from the occult methodologies I'd come to rely on in my work. She said, I'd come to realize that something most of my fellows apparently don't wish to accept, that there is no way one can engage in the study of these subjects and also save one's soul. It's a pretty big call. And this was her life for decades, is researching this stuff. And she walked away from it. And she's got numerous other examples of researchers that did this.
Imagine spending decades, like years of your life, just immersed in these topics, Oh, never mind.
Yeah. Well, John Keel's another example, apart from us. John Keel's another example.
Oh, he gave up. He left. He was
away.
Quite, no, I wouldn't say bitter, but he was definitely cynical about it towards the end.
And she sat down with David Jacobs and had a big conversation with him in regards to the research of this book. And Jacobs was the same. There was a point where David Jacobs, who, if you don't know, is the alien abduction researcher, he had to go, all right, I can't even think about this topic anymore. I have to try and have some kind of normal life with my family because this is just too depressing. This is too terrifying. I can't even contemplate it anymore. I'm out. And so she said she kind of emerged shell-shocked from this, she calls a spiritual battle. And she decided, okay, I'm going to look at something else. I'm going to look at something harmless. I'm going to start looking into UFOs. I'm going to start researching UFOs.
So it was almost like an accident.
Yeah. She's like, there won't be any questions about spirituality with that. I'll just get to the nuts and bolts of UFOs. And of course, she discovers it's a world more steeped in the occult than any tarot card reading, crystal carrying psychic witch she had encountered in her long career. She said, I found, in fact, that the study of UFOs draws one into a world and history filled with channeling, seances, black magic, and every other subcategory of the New Age. She says, as I devoured the literature on the encounters with purported UFOs and ETs, I also found, in case after case, that the evidence left behind by these beings, so we're talking burns, scratches, bruises, unexplained pregnancies, poltergeist activities,
puncture marks, scratches,
all these strange entity relationships.
Nosebleed.
She says this was often identical to the evidence left after encounters with the demonic.
Right.
So again, just to get it out of the way, I don't necessarily agree with the conclusions that these Catholic and Christian researchers come to. I agree with the general vibe. Like the activity is often evil. It's often demonic. But I still believe there's some kind of alien aspect to this phenomenon. It is not entirely demonic. It has certainly aspects of it, but I don't think you can put it in either bucket just yet. But she went on to say this was an old enemy dressed in the latest fashion. She said she wanted to explore some of the connections. And that's what I did today. So in order to go into this in more detail, I kind of need to give a good example we can keep drawing on.
Okay.
And the example is Uncle Ponto, the dirty little freak. So the original story of Uncle Ponto came from this classic from 1976 from Malachi Martin, Hostage to the Devil. And Malachi Martin's that
I know this one.
Famous exorcist.
Yeah.
And it's a great book. It's a classic book. And he covers the exorcisms of 5 different individuals in America. And the story I want to tell you is the story of Jamesy Z. And Jamesy is a pseudonym, of course, but this is a real guy. He was born in 1923 in New York to his father, Ara, who was of Armenian descent, and his mother, Lydia, who was had a Greek background. But they were third-generation Americans. So, yeah, born in 1923. They moved to New York City in 1929. 3-bedroom house on Penn Street. a really happy childhood, like a great childhood growing up. His dad worked as a handyman and a carpenter, and his mother just stayed home, raised him. And then when he was older, she got a job at the local laundromat. Again, very normal, happy upbringing. His dad would take him to baseball games. They'd go to Coney Island in the summer, go ice skating, all the fun stuff you do. And no major disruption in his early years. Home life was secure and safe and fun. And essentially, they had religion. Like his mother had this Virgin Mary icon, like a little statue. And she taught him prayers, and they would pray to it before bed. And, that was like his part of his religious upbringing. And it wasn't until he was 10 that there was a subtle change. And
in him or in the household?
Well, his parents started to notice something about him. And sometimes, he'd be walking along the streets of New York, and amongst the clutter that was in the shop windows, there's pots and pans and various goods. Occasionally he would see something reflected in the window of the shop front. And he called it a funny looking face. A face with a funny look. He would just catch a glimpse of it and then turn again and it would be gone. He would be seized with fright because it wasn't a human face. It was something else. And his parents remembered he used to arrive like completely white, terrifying, crying. And as he grew older, these funny face incidents, they became rarer, but they never totally went away. He would always see this thing. Now, his terror wasn't caused particularly by the ugliness, the alienness of the face, the non-human features of the face. The reason he was so scared of it, he told his parents, was that he felt like it knew him. Whatever this face was, it was looking at him. And he saw its recognition. And he told his parents, it looks at me and it knows me. It knows me. He used to sob to his mother. Now, when Jamesy was 14, his life changed more dramatically because his father decided, okay, being a carpenter, it's not making enough money. I need to get a different job. So his dad became a cabbie. And the problem was this didn't really mean much more money.
But much longer hours.
Much longer hours, like 12, 14-hour shifts. And, the days when his father would come home and play the clarinet for them in the afternoons, those days were over. He was just working all the time. And he used to sit with him on some of his cab rides just to keep, to hang out with his dad. But he said now and then as he sat beside his father in the cab, he started to see some strange transition on his father's face. He said once in a while, his father would be chatting on the curb to some customers or something, and he saw something about the faces of all of them change. He described it as a look. It was a really distinct look. It was momentary, but it was clearly there. He said it didn't really frighten him, it repelled him, but at the same time, he was fascinated by it. He's like, what is this face I keep seeing?
Was it the same, like you're saying it's a look, but is it the same face, the same expression that he would see in those windows?
It's like an echo of it.
Right.
There's similar features, right? Like they're related.
Enough to grab his attention.
Yeah. And he tried to look for it, but he could never find it. It only popped up when he wasn't thinking about it. He said at times this look acquired a terrible intensity, and he talks about two incidences in particular. There was one in 1938. He was at a Dodgers game with his dad, and there was a particular point in the game where it was really close and, something major happened and the crowd, the crowd was going bananas. And he turned around to look at the crowd, and in the sea of faces in this packed game, he saw the face, and the face was looking at him, not at the game.
So is this, possibly a form of schizophrenia that he might be suffering? Like, can schizophrenia come on in your teen years? Isn't that more?
I don't know. It's a good question. I guess, yeah, that's how it might be labeled. But then he would kind of look back and the face would be gone. It would just be like a normal crowd, normal faces again. A week later, he was watching his father listen to a boxing fight. And as the fight got on and it got more intense and it got to, the moment of the knockout, he saw it again on his father's face. His father's face became contorted. And for a few moments, he saw that look, that face. It was still his father, but it had changed slightly. And as time passed, his fear of this look began to lessen, but his curiosity got greater. What was this look that he kept seeing? And how was it that he saw it at the baseball game, but also on his father's face? Why did he see this in random people? What was the connection between this look he kept on seeing and, again, this funny face he kept on seeing reflected in the windows and in the mirrors? So things went from bad to worse for the family. One day he came home and his mother was all dolled up. And, that Virgin Mary icon I mentioned earlier, she had put a black cloth over it. And she's got lipstick on. She's wearing this tight dress, very revealing. And that's when he realizes, oh, Mum's got a new job. And his mother had decided that the money they needed desperately could be earned by being a prostitute. And so that's what she did. She went out and she worked nights as well. So now his father's out driving the cab at night and his mother's out whoring at night. And so for the first time, and there's a whole section on this, is a long part of the story. Like, he's obviously devastated by this. But for the first time, he's alone at night because the mother's out, the father's out. But he had the strangest feeling that he was in someone else's company, that there was someone there with him. And he looked around the living room slowly and through the window at the city. Couldn't see anything, but he had this feeling.
He could sense it.
He still felt deserted by his parents, he wrote, but he was nursing some secret that even he didn't understand yet. And as he got up each morning and looked at his mother before he left for school or later for, one of his early jobs, he saw that her face was changing as well, and he started to see that look in her face. Now, his father, in the meantime, just gets so much worse. His dad's like, well, I need to make more money. It's time to get involved with illegal gambling. Then his dad realizes, can probably make more money selling heroin. So his dad starts selling drugs. And one evening, his dad comes home and just coughing up blood and just collapses on the floor. He's just out of it. And his mother's God knows where. And he basically has to sit next to his dad on the bed and try and find a doctor to come and help him. And the doctor eventually comes and says, sorry, your dad's dying of tuberculosis.
Oh, wow.
And so he's basically nursing his dying father, no idea where his mother is. Eventually the mother comes home and they're watching, like, a few days have gone by. And there's this moment of terminal lucidity in his father where he leaps up out of bed and starts playing the clarinet, that he hadn't played in years.
Is it terminal lucidity?
Yeah. Yeah, has this moment of clarity and energy, and he plays like an ode to the Virgin Mary in front of that statue they had and pulls the black cloth off it, and then he just falls down dead.
Yeah, I was wondering, is that the next thing that happens? Does he suddenly die?
But he said, Jamesy said he looked at the face of his dead father and he realized he doesn't have that look anymore. That's the face of the father I grew up with. That's the face of my father that I remember before all this darkness came into our lives. And he looked like he was finally free of something.
Well, also, it's like where I think this is heading. We often talk about the actual physical manifestations of interacting with this phenomenon. And even though it's, he's described as consumption there, it's tuberculosis. But the other term for tuberculosis was consumption, right? But that's what the phenomenon does to people. It consumes people spiritually, psychically, but also physically. So it's like, is that the physical manifestation of something that had overtaken his father and the family?
Certainly sounds that way. The fact that he keeps saying he's seeing this face as well. But, maybe he's just got some mental condition like you suggested earlier. Anyway, he says a curious new feeling was building up, though. Without moving, without seeing anything different or hearing an ethereal voice or anything like that, he felt as if an alternative to his misery of loneliness was being offered to him. He experienced a strange sense of companionship. He was alone, but he wasn't really alone. So I like how Martin is really setting this up. You're starting to get a sense that there's something lurking, there's something happening, but he never quite sees it. He never quite interacts with it. It's just beneath the surface. And so he continues in 1940, he gets a job at NBC, and he really wants to get into radio. That's his whole career goal. A friend invites him to Oklahoma City, and he ends up going and training in broadcast and journalism in Oklahoma City. And this whole time, that feeling never arises, and he never sees that face, never has that experience. He just focuses on his training, his education. He moves back to New York. As soon as he gets back to New York City, he starts seeing the face again.
So this starts falling into this idea that's something to do with the area, the location.
Yeah, he starts seeing
Combination.
it in the diner. He sees it in the window, some face on the subway, always momentarily. But with it is this new suspicion, this new feeling. He's not scared of it anymore. He has this insatiable urge to remember something. He has this feeling that he knows this face. He knows what it is, and it's something from his past. And he's urging himself to remember. If only he could remember what it was, how he learned about it, who told him about it. And he keeps trying to recall it, but it's interesting the way it's described. It's like thoughts and memories just always just out of his grasp. Like it's, you're trying to remember something and
it's right on the tip of your tongue and you just can't. Yeah.
Just like the very essence of the idea is there or the thought, but you can't quite grasp it. It's like that. And he's constantly frustrated about this.
Is this potentially something past life, or is it definitely this existence?
We don't know, but he gets a job in radio and his colleagues start noticing something about him that's a little off. He talks to himself. He mutters to himself. And often they'll catch him like in this grimace where he's like, fists clenched.
Like clenching his fists.
And his jaw clenched as if he's angry, but not like at the coffee pot or something, not at anyone in particular.
Misplaced stress.
Yeah, it's weird. They're like, yeah, he's a little weird, but aren't we all a little weird? And they still get along with the guy. Anyway, after 2 years in New York, he's transferred to Cleveland for another job. And this is all still in radio. And one evening he's walking down Euclid Avenue on his way home and he starts to think about this look. Like, where is this look coming from? And now he feels like he's tacking on to the idea, the memory. He's got a hold of it. And he describes the memory taking shape. And he's like walking down the street, almost craning forward, like he's using his body to try and grab onto the memory. And he starts to feel excited, like this is it. I'm going to figure it out. I'm going to get this memory. I'm going to pull it out of wherever it is. And suddenly, he claims he sees words and pictures form themselves into a long stream and fly out of the top of his head and disappear into the sky.
So it's like the thought escaped?
He lost it. Yeah. But what's so interesting is it's like he's got a bit of synesthesia and he actually sees it disappear. Like it vanishes into the sky and he's trying to grab it and he can't hold on to it. And he's so pissed off. He's so angry. And he turns to go to the diner where he usually gets dinner. And as soon as he walks in at the back of the diner, there's a couple sitting down eating their dinner and he sees the face. They've both got the face. And he's like, what is going on? He like storms in there and confronts them. But when he gets to them, it's just it's just an elderly couple enjoying their dinner, looking at him like, what the hell's going on? So from that moment, he was convinced something was playing hide and seek with him. There was some intelligence to this. And he couldn't figure out why it was doing it, how it was doing it. But he realized it was something intelligent that was messing with him.
Is it taunting him or is it just kind of making its presence known?
It's like it teases him with some knowledge, but he can never grasp it. And this continues. So he gets jobs in Detroit, New Orleans, Kansas City, LA. This is all between 1951, 1956, still in radio, honing his craft. And about a year after moving to LA, he was driving home one evening from his radio gig and he feels that feeling again, like he's not alone. But this time he looks in the rearview mirror and there's a face sitting in the back of his car.
Just a face?
There's someone. He sees the face in the rearview mirror. Now, he's not frightened and he's not even surprised. And there's a feeling of familiarity. Like, this has happened before. And the eyes of the face that's looking at him, he knows the owner. He slowly slows down and again glances in the mirror, and he sees large, bulbous eyes looking at him. They look red. He said, I can't believe they're red. It must be like the reflection from the streetlights. The face has a nose, ears, mouth, cheeks, and a very strange chin. Like the chin is pointed. This weird pointed chin. He's got like a high domed forehead. The skin, it could be dark, it could be tan, it could be white. He can't quite make it out. But there's something more than the vividness of the face that bothers him. He says it's the absence of something in the face. Now, the face is alive, but there's this. It's interesting how he describes it in the book. It's almost like you would call it an uncanny valley.
Yeah, I was just thinking that.
There's something quite right about it.
But you can't work it out.
It's like there's something really just lacking in the face. And he eventually makes it home and he turns into his driveway.
To be honest with you, though, I know that you're saying like he somehow on some level knows this thing, but also it almost feels like he's under the control of it in some way. Because if you suddenly realize that there was a figure sitting in the back of your vehicle, even if you knew it, like let's say I'm driving along and all of a sudden I look in my rear vision mirror and you're sitting in the back of my car, I'm not going to be like, oh, that's just Ben. I'll just keep on driving. I'm like, what the hell are you doing in my car?
Yeah, have a reaction.
Yeah. Like, how did you get in there?
It's almost like, you know how in Australia you roll over and there's a giant spider near your face and you don't want to move. You don't want to like bother it.
Yeah.
You just got to
be
chill.
You need to get out of the city. Well, but then that's because we somehow instinctually know that there's danger there.
Yeah. It's like that kind of, you get a sense of that. So he pulls into his driveway and he hears this voice. And he says it kind of sounds like a eunuch. And I'm still a little bit sick, so I'll try my best. And the voice says, oh, for Pete's sake, Jamesy, stop acting the fool. We've been together for years. Don't tell me you don't know me. Now he pulls into his garage and the voice again says, well, so long, Jamesy. See you soon. Wait for your Uncle Ponto.
I'm just looking it up. There's an old story by, what's the guy's name? He was that actor. Was it Telly Savalas? The bald guy from The Dirty Dozen. Do you remember the story that he told?
No.
Remember he was basically, he needed a ride. He got I can't remember the exact crux of the details, but he got himself stuck and he needed a ride somewhere. And out of nowhere, in this dark abandoned road, this car rocks up, right? And this door opens and this guy's like, oh, I'll give you a ride. And it's some dude. Like the voice, it was like this really high-pitched, strange voice.
He said he sounded like a eunuch, like he really odd, sing-songy, high-pitched voice.
If I find it, I'll put it in the show notes because it's a crazy story.
Well, when he got into his home, like Uncle Ponto disappeared after that. But when he got into his home, there was this smell.
Are you kidding? Like a sulfurous?
No, not sulfur. He said it was like, he didn't make a connection to it the first time he smelt it, to this entity, but he said it was like pungent, this pungent smell.
Mildewy?
No.
Just pungent.
Again, the synesthesia thing kicks in because later he says it would be like the color red had a smell. That's what it smelled like.
Oh, so it's not necessarily off-putting, but it's also attention-grabbing?
Yeah, he just said it was really strong, but he didn't make that connection. Anyway, the following Sunday, Jamesy's driving down the highway and Ponto suddenly appears sitting on the roof of his car. You know, he's going like 100 Ks down the highway.
How does he know he's on the roof of the car? Does he kind of dip over the...
Ponto, like the weird goblin creature, hangs his head down. Is like, hey! And starts like making a motion with his hand. Like
to go faster?
Like he's going to throw something. And Uncle Ponto, he pretends like he's throwing a baseball up into the sky. And as Jamesy's driving and he watches Ponto do this, these words, like a giant billboard, appear in the blue sky before him. And the first one says, welcome to Jamesy, my friend. Greatest blowout for the mind. And pitches another ball up. It says, Ponto, Jamesy, pals, rejoice. Welcome. Like these crazy messages appearing in the sky.
You would definitely think you're going mad.
And he's like swerving because he's trying to read these messages, and the weird creature's like, well, let Ponto drive. Let Uncle Ponto take the wheel. And he grins and then disappears. Now, he describes, again, the physical nature of this entity. He wasn't misshapen, but again, he's not a human being. There was a funny lack in his face again, but his head was too large, his chin too pointed, the eyelids strange, the nose and mouth always contorted in this strange expression. His hands were more like mechanical claws. His body, in parts, seemed to have the flexibility of a cat, to be thinner than his enormous pointed head. His legs were bandy, disproportionate. His feet were splayed like a duck's, and all the toes were of even length and the same size. Jamesy was sure Ponto wasn't human, but beyond that, he was sure of nothing except that Uncle Ponto was real. This thing was showing up. It was real as any object around him. And
did anyone else see it?
Well, he started to affect the world. Like, for example, he started to notice that the smell would appear. This is when he made the connection. The smell would be a precursor to Uncle Ponto appearing, right?
Well, this is why I said sulfur before, because for a number of people that have supernatural experiences, sulfur is a precursor to the appearance of an entity.
Yeah, and this Uncle Ponto...
Or mildew.
He would appear in the weirdest places. Like, he'd be driving along the highway and Uncle Ponto would just be hanging from the overpass like a gremlin. Or he would go to pay for something at the deli and Uncle Ponto would be sitting on the cash register.
You know what it sounds like? I mean, I know it's fiction, but it sounds like Drop Dead Fred with the whole invisible friend kind of thing. It sounds like it,
it's like that.
Yeah, this invisible friend that just kind of shows up in random locations but kind of interacts with the world without the world knowing.
But he could affect the world.
Well, that's what these invisible friends can too.
For example, when he's sitting on the cash register at the deli, he would take money out and he would put it on the counter to pay for whatever he was buying. Or if he went to the dry cleaner, Uncle Ponto would tear the tags off the clothes. Like, he would manipulate the world around him. So that's why Jamesy knew that he was real. And he did the usual poltergeist stuff too, like turn the lights on and off, taps, open a door for him when he was going to walk into a building or something, just weird stuff like that. And it started to wear down Jamesy's patience. He's like, this thing's freaking annoying. Like, at first he was amused by it's kind of a funny character to show up.
And also intrigued as well, but she'd be like, what the hell is this?
Yeah, and this curiosity. And eventually his frustration grew. He tried to ignore this thing. But eventually he finally asked the question that opened the floodgates.
Which was?
What do you want? And immediately this was it. Like, this entity was like, just to be with you, Jamesy, he said. I thought you'd never ask. Actually, I want to be your friend. Did you ever know anyone as faithful and as attendant on you as I am? He's this creep. He's an absolute creep. And then he, like, when he was saying this, he was swinging from the lights and then he, like, did a backflip and disappeared. It's just weird elf, right? But anyway, this question opened the floodgates. He now became the object of a continual barrage from Uncle Ponto that went on week after week, and there would be no let-up for years. Ponto would start talking in his ear the moment he left his building in the morning. Like, oh, good morning, Jamesy. What are we doing today? Like, this weird freak following him around all day.
So is this what the colleagues were seeing when he was talking to himself?
No, this was before.
Before, okay.
This was all before this. But most of it was just innocuous, inane nonsense.
Oh, God, it would drive me nuts.
Like, it's like having a 3-year-old babbling at you all day with no break. And once, it got to the point where Ponto started to push it a little bit and see what would get his attention, like get him to react. And he started to talk about his mother. And this is where Jamesy lost it and said, you never to talk about my mother. Shut up. Like, actually gave him attention because he's just trying to ignore the thing. He's like,
but it knows now. It's like, that's
okay,
the button
Jamesy.
I can press.
Okay, Jamesy, have it your way, but we belong to each other, it says. God, my voice is going to go. So he deals with this, but then he gets to work. He gets to his radio gig, and he starts to actually think, am I just going nuts? Is this just all in my head? Am I actually crazy? And he does go and see a psychologist, and the psychologist is like, you're just making this up on purpose and you're lying to me. Screw you. Get out of my office. Like
That's
he
very
really
professional.
does not get any help.
But you know what that means, though? That means that he's not displaying typical, what would it be? Like, it's like what's the term? Like schizoid kind of symptoms.
That was the diagnosis. And that's why the psychologist thought you're making this up on purpose, because he didn't show any of the typical signs of someone being psychotic.
Yeah.
But when he got to his job and he's actually on air, like we are now, he's on air. They have this communication between the engineer and it's like a message board.
Yeah.
And Ponto starts writing messages on the message board. He's like, it's okay, I forgive you. We're still pals, right? Ha ha ha. And it keeps, like he's trying to do his job. Imagine us trying to tell a story and there's a little gremlin creature writing messages to you.
I wouldn't mind. That's like a studio dog.
And he's like, forgiven. Carry on, pal. I'll be back soon.
Yeah, it would be incredibly distracting.
And in spite of all this is what's so amazing about the story, is he was kicking ass at his job. He was doing really well at the radio station. His colleagues just thought he was a bit of a weirdo, but his ratings were good. People were listening to him. And he was doing so well, he got a lucrative job in San Francisco to start on a new station and get his own kind of time slot, like a peak time slot.
Can I anticipate that Uncle Ponto doesn't want him to go?
No, it's actually the opposite. So,
really?
He's offered this job and he drives to San Francisco, moves from LA, and Ponto followed him obviously to San Francisco. And he had this moment where he had to go and meet the boss for the first time of this new radio station. And the front door's locked and he can't get in through there for some reason. He goes around the back. But the whole time Ponto's acting strange. Like Ponto starts talking gobbledygook. And he says weird stuff before he goes to meet the new boss. He's like, make sure you don't have sex with anyone, okay? And Jamesy's
trying to embarrass him?
It's weird that you mentioned that. I haven't had any desire ever since you appeared in my life. It's like his sexual drive just vanished. But he's like, make me promise that you won't go drinking and boozing and having sex. Not that like that's a problem for you. And eventually he starts talking gobbledygook. It's like Ponto's a robot and his programming starts to break down. He starts saying complete nonsense like, Jupiter rotates every 9 hours and 55 minutes. Hurrah, the Golden Gate don't fall into the water. Black, black. Like just starts sprouting nonsense, like getting faster and faster and more nonsensical. And he disappears when the boss opens the back door and is like, oh, are you the new guy? Yeah, let's come in and have a chat. So this boss, his name's Jay Badim. He's the station manager, and they sit down and have this meeting. And he says he's a very meticulous guy, very orderly, very clean cut, very straight to the point, all business. And at the end of the meeting, he realizes that there's nothing behind his eyes. This new boss is like a weird NPC. It's like
the same feeling that he got with the entity showing up in the back of his vehicle.
Even worse than that. Okay. It's like this weird. There's something missing, but it's even more obvious. It's like he doesn't have a soul or something. It's really strange. But what's weird is he notices that Ponto is never around when this boss is around.
Oh, is Ponto his boss?
It's strange. Like
can he possess people? Is that what's happening?
We don't know. It's almost like Ponto starts to diminish. His power starts to diminish whenever this other guy, his boss, is around, Jay Badim. Like there's something about his field or it nullifies Ponto's power.
Well, I would wonder as well, I mean, and maybe I'm reaching too far out of the box here, but, we have heard of cases of where there are competing entities. It's like you already you make yourself the attention of the phenomenon, and you have competing entities which have different levels of ability going for you.
You're very close to the truth. I'll reveal what the connection is as we move on with the story. In the end, with this new job, it turns out Uncle Ponto was good for business. See, when he sat down to do his radio show, his 3-hour slot or whatever it was, Ponto would dance around him in the studio and give him facts and little tidbits of information and interesting little stories and just stuff to riff on.
So before there was the internet where you could just load stuff up,
Yeah, it's like not even that. It's kind of like an off the cuff.
It's a co-host. It's a silent co-host.
It was just giving him this constant stream of off the cuff, interesting factoids and information. It's like imagine like the Robin Williams style, over the top,
A genie.
energy, kind of blurting out all this kind of funny quips.
Yeah.
It's like he was doing that through Ponto. Ponto was feeding him all this.
Was he possessed by Ponto?
Well, it would get to the point where he'd throw out all these facts and you go, lest I think of this, and then go, blah, 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 blah. And then he would throw out like the sales pitch for the product they were advertising. Then he would move on to a song and people loved it. He had this style that was so energetic and constantly moving, and people were loving it. His ratings were off the charts. He was kicking ass. And he realized it's because Ponto was dancing around feeding him all these lines.
But we know that you pay for that in some way. So what is he giving Ponto?
Like, it gets so creepy after this because this is after a string of harmless interactions. Like Ponto, he's a pretty funny, weird little creepy goblin. Like he's disturbing, but he's not really scared of him. But he starts to get a real sense of fear when one evening he's driving home and Ponto's in the back seat. And Ponto kind of leans forward and he's like, Jamesy, let's get married.
Oh my God.
When are we getting married, Jamesy?
Probably better than I thought was going to happen. So that's...
And initially he just dismisses this as more like nonsensical chatter from Ponto. But no, Ponto's serious. He's like, Jamesy, let's get married.
Isn't there like an old fae folk thing? Is it called the spirit marriage or something? Like you kind of get trapped with these entities?
But not with a little goblin dude.
No.
Like maybe some sexy mermaid from another dimension. Not some creepy goblin dude.
Look, are the two consenting entities? I guess. Go for your life. But I'm assuming that he's probably not as consenting as this horrible gremlin little entity.
Maybe that's why Ponto was telling him not to go and have sex with any women.
Yeah, right.
But Ponto keeps drilling this, and he's starting to get genuine fear. Now he's actually scared because Ponto is really serious. The following day at the station cafeteria,
Ponto's going to turn into a jealous ex-girlfriend, isn't he?
Well, Jamesy he's really troubled by this. Like he's actually sitting down, like pondering this change in events. And one of the co-workers who has a bit of a soft spot for him realizes, can just see from his body language that something's not right. And she actually invites him to dinner. She says, why don't you come? And I've got a friend coming over and I've got a couple of steaks. Why don't you come over for dinner? And he's about to say no. Like, first of all, he's shocked that anyone would invite him because he hasn't really had this kind of friendship with anyone. And before he gets to answer, she's like, okay, see you at 5:30. And she just walks away laughing. Now, that evening, he goes to her house and she's got the steaks and there's a ring at the doorbell and it's her other guest that's coming to this dinner party. And he goes and opens the door and it's her friend, Father Mark, who is a local exorcist. And they sit down and have dinner. And I don't know if she put them together because she could tell as well, but they have this long dinner conversation and this guy's listening intently to his story. And
so he's explaining to them about this entity.
For some reason, Jamesy opens up to him.
Yeah, that's pretty unusual. Like if you don't, because you pointed out there that he's not really friends with anyone. And the next second he goes to dinner, he's like, oh, I've got this gremlin that's trying to marry me. He must be at the end of his rope.
Well, it's like this Father Mark is very perceptive as well and can probably read the signs. And they have a great conversation and this Father Mark says, look, why don't you come to my rectory tomorrow and we'll have a longer conversation. And so he meets up with him the next day and this is where he basically spends hours telling him his life story of how this voice came and this presence and the problem with his parents and everything.
It just pulls back a curtain. There's like a silkwood, like holy water shower there ready to go.
Yeah. And Mark's like, Father Mark is like, well, Ponto. They always have these crazy names. And he starts telling him, he says, listen to me. I've seen this countless times before.
Right,
he says, what you're dealing with is a particular type of spirit. He says, this is a familiar. And a familiar.
Well, they're normally with witches, aren't they?
Well,
and wizards.
The way he explains it is it's an entity that like the name, it tries to become so familiar with you that it essentially becomes a part of you. So he describes it as, how you're alone with your thoughts. All of us can understand this. We're alone with our thinking. Maybe we have an inner monologue about something. He says for someone with a familiar, you have your thoughts, but you also have its thoughts, and you're never truly separate. You constantly have this shared consciousness that tries to get more and more into you, so to speak. And
well, there's that consumption I was talking about earlier.
He actually compares it to Siamese twins, but of the mind, of the consciousness. And Jamesy, he recognized the accuracy of everything this guy's saying, and he's horrified. He's like, I've already gone down this path, because the guy explains, eventually it's going to want to become more and more intimate with you. And he's like, he wants to marry me. It's talking marriage proposals, this thing. And Mark reassures him and says, you need to reject it. You need to reject it. You need to reaffirm your conscious independence of this entity. You've got to reject it. And he eventually says, we should exorcise this entity. Do you want to have an exorcism? And he explains the ins and outs, but Mark is like, the first thing he thinks of is his job.
Yeah. And the money and security that comes with it.
He's like, I need Ponto.
Yeah.
He can't imagine life without Ponto.
You got to make, but this is the issue, right? This is the choice you have to make. Do you give up part of yourself, and God knows, is that part of your soul, to this entity so that you can have, temporary material, wealth and happiness, or do you get rid of the damn thing?
And this is what he asks. He's like, will Ponto be gone forever? And obviously, the Father Mark is like, yeah, he'll be gone. And he's like, I'll get back to you. And so what he decides to do is he calls another psychologist. And he starts talking to this psychologist. And after the first meeting with the psychologist, the whole time Ponto's been quiet for a few days, hasn't said a word. As soon as he comes back from the psychologist, Ponto appears again in the backseat of the car, and he's like, gee, that shrink, he's a swell guy. He's great. That shrink, you should keep seeing him.
Because
obviously the shrink was like, okay, this is all in your mind, blah, 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 blah.
Right. Whereas the exorcist or the priest is saying, this is very real.
Yeah.
And this is the thing. This is why I think, we talk about this stuff, people saying that, oh, it's not all bad and that kind of stuff. But the reality is, right, look what it's doing. This thing is encouraging a person to be in denial about it. It's encouraging a person to not accept that it's real when it's apparently very real.
Well, at this point, it's like Ponto has a deadline, and he starts to step up his pressure on Jamesy.
Does he become aggressive?
Yeah, more and more Jamesy feels that his thoughts are being impressed on by Ponto, and he begins to experience two sets of thoughts and feelings, his own and Ponto's.
Mm-hmm.
Now, he always knows the difference between his thoughts and Ponto's thoughts, but he's got no privacy of mind. It's like Ponto is always there injecting ideas, words, conversation. And amazingly enough, his work continues to be excellent. He's doing really well at the radio station because of Ponto. But internally, it's becoming unbearable. And this desperation takes hold of him, and Ponto doesn't let up. He's chattering on, and he's constantly saying a new phrase, which is, let Ponto in. He's like, let Ponto in. Let Ponto in.
So it's like this final, I suppose, like a conscious barrier that is like, once it crosses that threshold, it's in.
It's like Jamesy, you're right. He needs to give Ponto permission.
Yeah.
He needs to accept. And
does it become aggressive?
Yeah, it just gets relentless. So it's the point where normally Ponto would leave him alone in the evenings. He could kind of decompress and relax and have a good night's sleep. But now Ponto's showing up in the evenings, and Ponto has a chant that gets really annoying. And again, it's like a 3-year-old. He's like, let me in, let me in, and he just keeps
that would drive you nuts.
Doing that for hours, over and over and over. And eventually Jamesy's shrieking at him like, shut up, shut up. And he said the neighbors called the police a bunch of times because you just got this screaming man.
Well, this is where the neighbors would think that you've got, a neighbor who's suffering from schizophrenia.
And he always gets a break at night, and even that goes away. Eventually he hears a cacophony of voices coming from the kitchen, and it's like Ponto with like 100 other people. And Ponto's like, come on, guys, he's in here. And there's all these other people talking, and it's like you're hearing a party of people coming to your bedroom. And he hears Ponto say, Jamie, would you mind, Jamesy? I've got some of my friends and associates here. Do you mind if they join us? We are getting married after all. And he's just like, leave me alone, screaming at them. And he says, it's no use, Jamie. You and I, we're meant for each other. And eventually Ponto starts insisting that Jamesy and him need to be intimate at night. It's just like
spooning with a demon.
There's probably like some internet dobby porn that would give you like, I don't have any pictures prepared or anything. I don't have any images ready.
Yeah, good.
But if you want to Google dobby porn,
use the Google Pixel AI generator. Create your own.
That'll work.
Before it gets censored. This is probably the only time, like, you know what? Censorship's actually a good thing.
Harry Potter spooning Dobby.
Oh.
That's the prompt for the AI. And
you should try Midjourney.
He says what he meant by that, Jamesy was never sure, but it did mean he would spend nights in Jamesy's apartment. So Ponto's basically moving in. And the whole time he's like, should I telephone the priest?
Oh my God. Should.
And he never does. He's just like, maybe I should call the one guy that had a solution to my problems and totally understood everything that's happening to me. No, I'll just go to work and pretend everything's fine.
But this is a thing, right? So it's like, there's that saying of like selling your soul for fiat. You know, and I really think that that's happening. Like it happens so much. We see it so much. I think it's always happened. We see it so much more now just because of the nature of the world, the internet access, right? It's always happened though. People have sold their soul for material goods. But this what this guy is doing. Like I think on some level, I don't really want to read into it because I don't know him obviously, but it sounds like he knows that it's not good. It sounds like he's irritated. He sounds like there's something bad about to happen, but he's like, I really need that job.
It's like he's got no willpower either.
Yeah.
Like he doesn't have the will to take control of his own consciousness. And so now he's losing sleep. So he's right at the edge. And he goes to work and he has a full-on breakdown. Like he's in his office and he has one of these moments where he thinks he's going to grasp the origin of the face and he's grasping at all these ideas and he feels like this is it. That's how it feels like to him, like he's about to crack some code. But to his co-workers at the office, they're looking into his office and he's sitting at his desk like clenching and veins bulging out of his neck and just clenching, staring into nothing. Eventually, his co-workers come and put their hands on his shoulders and say, Jamesy, are you okay?
To bring him back.
He's totally out of it. They cannot get through to him. He's like in a trance. Eventually, there's like 4 of his co-workers in his office trying to like snap him out of this. And eventually his boss walks in and that like breaks the spell. Cause remember his boss for some reason repels Ponto. So anyway, his boss just like sends him home, but really he's like, you're fired. Get the hell out of here. He
fires him for that.
No, he doesn't fire him, but that's his last day. He never goes back because his boss is like, clearly you're not stable. Anyway, he drives home and he just collapses on the bed. He wakes up at 7 a.m. and you know what wakes him up? The smell. The Ponto smell. And he hears this like
please don't let he hear something wet as well.
And it's coming from his closet. And he's like, because Ponto often appears in that closet, like hanging from the rail or something. And he's like, and he goes to the closet. And he quickly like, opens the closet. And there's Ponto gouging out the eyes of that Virgin Mary statue that was his mother's. His mother's passed away and he took that Virgin Mary statue and
what
kept
is it? A ceramic statue? And he's somehow...
I think it's carved, like a wooden carved statue.
Yeah.
And Ponto's like gouging out the eyes with his fingernails and he looks at it and the eyes, it's just like 2 black pits where the eyes were. So and now Ponto's starting on the mouth, scratching it away.
Symbolically, that's I mean, apart from it already is creepy, but even from a religious perspective, that's extremely creepy.
And he catches him in the act, and Ponto's like, well, we won't be needing this anymore, will we, Jamesy, you and I? After all, I can't spend the night with this thing beside me, can I? It's just...
Okay, at this point, pertinent question, does he call the priest?
No, but he does gain some form of clarity, and that clarity is, I'm going to kill myself.
Oh my God.
He has this moment where he thinks the only way out of this is to die.
No, it's not.
It's the only... Yeah, well...
But that's what it wants.
Yeah.
It wants that.
So there's a whole other huge part of this story, but I'll just give you the general highlights. He drives out to this national park in California somewhere, and there's a cliff that overlooks a reservoir, this huge reservoir, and it's like jumping off a giant bridge or something. Like if you hit that water, you'll die. And his idea is, I'm going to throw myself off there and put an end to this. So he goes to the national park and, parks his car, and he goes through this huge hike. And the whole time, Ponto's like in his ear, like badgering him.
Encouraging him or trying to stop him?
At first, he's like, it'll be all right. We're destined for each other. Come back and let's get married. But as he's getting closer to the cliff, it's like he's changing, and Ponto's eventually like, fucking do it. Do it. Jump. But something really strange happens on his way up to this cliff face. He sees something following them. And it's not Ponto. Like, he can see Ponto. Like, he can see his footsteps, and he's swinging around on the trees and everything. But there's something else following him. And he sees it in the darkness of this shadow that's next to this cliff face that he's climbing. And as he gets to the edge, he takes a look back and he sees it move. He sees the shadow move. And again, Ponto's like trying to distract him. Ponto's like, let's do it. Jump, jump, jump. But as Ponto's voice fades away, he sees the outline of this thing standing there in the darkness. He says all the details start to fall into place. The shadow is tall, abnormally tall, bulky. The body is covered in black folds. He can see the two arms raised at the elbows, the palms of the hands turned towards him, fingers, fists clenching. The head is lifted up, thrown back, almost in this haughtiness expression, pride in some sense. Dimly, he can make out eyes, a nose, and a mouth. And the shape of the face, it had all the details of a human face, yet it was not human. It was something else. And again, he has this familiarity. Where have I seen this before?
Is this the same thing that appeared in the back of the car?
Well, the Ponto was what appeared in the back of the car.
No, but it wasn't there prior to Ponto showing up. Wasn't there like just sense that like there'd be a flash of a face? Is this the same face?
Yeah. It's got the elements of the face he kept on seeing. He says it all took a few quick moments, but the shadow receded noiselessly into the darkness beneath the crag of the cliff. Jamesy became conscious of another element in himself, a tiny voice of instinct, a primal part of him still alive, still vibrant. He knew that he had seen the father of all man's real enemies in this shadow. Now his eyes fell away, and again he looked to the cliff face. Now's the time to jump. And he's looking out at this reservoir, and he suddenly remembers, my father took me here as a kid. I've been here before. And this memory of being there with his father and having this amazing day, exploring this area and looking out over the reservoir and seeing the beauty of this water, all of a sudden he thinks, it's sacrilegious to spoil this with my body, to throw myself off here, to have my bloated corpse floating in that pristine water. There was something about the beauty of that memory with his father that stopped him from jumping.
Not stopped him, it saved him.
It's totally saved him. And the whole time, Ponto's in the background going, jumper, 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 jumper.
It's a soul collector. That's what it is. It's a soul collector.
And the final thing is Ponto going like, jump, like shrieking at him. And he's like, no. That this memory of his father turns him around, and he goes back to his car.
What about the figure?
It's gone.
Right.
But the ranger sees him and the ranger's like, dude, are you all right? Because clearly he looks messed up. And he's like, please, can I borrow your phone? He calls Father Mark. Says, I need your help. Let's do this.
Oh, it only takes until you're standing on the edge of a reservoir about to jump before you're like, you know what? Just before I do this, I'm just going to give the priest a call.
I'll link to the book in the show notes if you want to read the full story. But he performs this exorcism. It takes 6 days.
Yeah, right.
It is full on.
Like Hollywood exorcist style kind of stuff?
No, not quite Hollywood, but there are some really insane supernatural aspects that occur during these 6 days.
Levitation?
Well, Father Mark, he has 4 helpers. He's got a young priest, and this priest, he's got 2, Catholic friends who, business owners, but they help out. And there's a doctor on standby as well to make sure that, he's going to be fine. And there's a certain moment where, he's doing the usual exorcism stuff where he's like, I command you to leave in the name of Jesus. And, you're doing all that stuff, waving the crucifix around. And the assistants all start screaming.
Why?
They're holding their ears and they're shrieking, like, shrieking. And he turns around, Father Mark turns around, and they're just like bent over in pain. Like one of them's on the floor writhing, and they're like, make it stop. And he's like, what? The noise. And they can hear this like 200 decibel high-pitched shrieking in all their ears. Father Mark can't hear it. And he tells them, get back. And as they get back, because they're in this basement in the rectory, as they get back towards the back of the room, the noise dissipates and they have to stand all the way back on the back of the room and the noise goes. And then they try and walk forward again to help Father Mark and they can't. There's now this force field stopping them from getting close to him. And if they get further and try and push into it, they're debilitated by this shrieking noise again. Now, what they also notice is Father Mark, he's concentrating on trying to get this entity out, and he's holding up the crucifix and doing his thing, and he's proselytizing, he's calling in the name of Jesus and all that stuff that they do. Except the assistants, they can't hear anything. There's like this.
So it's like the force field is actually somehow physically stopping sound waves.
It's stopping the sound. It's physically stopping them, which makes sense. If it's blocking them, it would block the sound. And then this white mist starts to form where they can barely make out what's going on. And as they look closer, they see at this point, Jamesy he's on a bed and they've actually strapped him down. And
yeah.
I'll explain why in the plus extension coming up. But they look, and standing behind Father Mark is the shadow.
Are you kidding me?
And they say...
The face? Can they see a face?
All they see is this, it's weird the way they describe it. It's like this 8-9 foot tall undulating shadow. It's clearly humanoid, but they said it moved like a cat. And it was standing behind the priest, looking for something, looking for some opportunity. And they're screaming at him, turn around. It's behind you. Turn around.
But he can't hear them.
He can't hear them. There's a complete block of sound. They can't get to him. Jamesy's completely taken over. And there's this thing behind Father Mark. And eventually we learn that Ponto is not the master.
Yeah, I was just thinking, because we're talking about, like the priest said to him earlier, oh, it's a familiar. It wants to be, it's not his familiar. It's this entity's familiar.
Ponto serves another master.
Yeah.
And that master will be revealed in our plus extension coming up. We'll also discuss who's behind the boss, this weird boss that was repelling Ponto in some weird way. I'll link to the book in the show notes. Again, Malachi Martin, Hostage to the Devil. And of course, all of this sprang from this brilliant book, which I'll talk about more exclusively on Tuesday for our Plus members, The Devil in Dreamland by Ursula Bielski, which is really fantastic. I'll link to that as well. But some answers coming up, and we'll have a discussion after the break. Exclusive to Plus. If you want to get access, head to mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. Sign up today. You get access to the extensions on these shows every single Friday. And of course, Plus members get exclusive shows. There's an exclusive concurrently running season that comes out every Tuesday just for our Plus members. Sign up today, mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. And if you sign up for the MU Max tier, you get access to our entire back catalogue going back 17 years.
16 and a half.
So if you go through that back catalogue, you'll come to the same conclusions that we have.
But except rather than being an entire 16 years of you having to listen to it, because that was every single week, you can do it in do it in 6 months.
So you're like those new listeners, they come in like, I've been listening to every episode for 2 weeks. Oh my God. It's like, don't.
And burnt out and destroyed.
Yeah, you always hear the new
spoon
listeners.
feed it. You can't just go hardcore.
I know.
It's like a heroin overdose.
They always go on these marathons where they're listening to 2 or 3 episodes a day. It's like, are you insane?
I had a guy email me years ago. This is years ago. This is when we first put up the back catalogue. And he was just the most angry, vicious, vile, nasty email that I've ever seen. It was just disgusting. A month later, he emailed me. He's like, I'm so sorry.
Why?
I'm like, why? And he's like, I listened to you guys nonstop constantly for 3 months. And I was like, what? Of course.
So he was upset because he listened to us constantly?
He was he was basically just overwhelmed. He's like, I didn't listen to anyone else. It was just you guys. It was always in my head. I'm like, we became his Ponto. So just drip feed yourself, okay? Just drip feed yourself. Don't go hardcore because anything, too much of a good thing is bad for anyone. So
it is a little bit like heroin. He was waking up in the morning. He's like,
he was going to sleep with it in his ears.
Got to put an episode on. It's like scratching. He's got all these wounds from scratching.
You know what? I've always monitored him as well. He's still a subscriber.
Is he?
Yeah.
Nice. He's still in the database.
He's still in the database.
Well, make sure you get the hit, mysteriousuniverse.org/plus. Sign up today. Help support your favorite show. That's a wrap for this free edition of MU. More coming up. Aaron's got an amazing segment coming up after the break. Looking forward to hearing about this meteorological spontaneous teleportation.
The third law of spontaneous teleportation, meteorology.
And we'll find out what happens to creepy Uncle Ponto as well. Thanks for listening. Thanks for being a free member. If you're on Plus, stick around for the great stuff after the break. For everyone else, we'll catch you next week.